The Day the Crown Fought Back, How the Windsor Machine Ended the Sussex Era Forever, London. February 11th, 2026. There are moments in history that look like peace but smell like war. This was one of them. For weeks, the world had been told that a settlement was coming, that two people who had once stood on the steps of Windsor Castle, radiating the kind of love that made cynics believe again, were finally ready to stop bleeding in public and start healing in private. The headlines were cautiously optimistic. The mediators were expensive. The mood was careful. And then, in the space of a single morning, it all collapsed. Not slowly, not gracefully, but with the kind of sudden, irreversible violence that only happens when someone has been quietly planning their next move while everyone else was celebrating the ceasefire. By the time the sun had fully risen over the Brentwood legal complex, what was supposed to be a signed peace framework had become the opening shot of the most explosive legal confrontation the British monarchy had ever faced from within its own bloodline. And here is what nobody is telling you clearly enough. This was not a story about a marriage falling apart. Marriages fall apart every single day. This was a story about power, about who gets to control the future of two children who were born into one of the most scrutinized institutions on earth, and about what an ancient monarchy is truly capable of when it decides that silence is no longer enough. Before we go any further, I need you to hold on to one sentence. Because everything you are about to hear, every financial revelation, every courtroom moment, every shocking strategic move, like all of it is building toward a single sentence delivered by a judge in a sealed California courtroom. A sentence so precise, so devastating, and so historically loaded that it will be quoted in legal textbooks for generations. You cannot weaponize motherhood and reject responsibility in the same breath. We will get there. But first, you need to understand exactly how we arrived at that moment. Because the road to February 18th, 2026 was not a straight line. It was a labyrinth of legal filings, offshore accounts, encrypted servers, diplomatic maneuvers, and one classified document that proved this was never really about custody at all. This is the full story, and nothing has been left out. The agreement that was supposed to end everything was called the Windsor, California Custodial Safeguard Act. 3 core terms: clean, structured, seemingly final. 2 supervised visitations per month. 0 travel for the children without mutual written consent. And a 60-40 split on education costs. On paper, it was the kind of arrangement that family law professionals describe as balanced and sustainable. In reality, it lasted less than 24 hours. Before the document had even been formally filed, the counteroffensive had already begun. The legal motion that arrived from Meghan's lead attorney, Cher Tilden, was not a polite objection, it was a demolition. 72 pages designed not just to challenge the terms of the agreement, but to fundamentally reframe the entire narrative of who had wronged whom, who held power, and who deserved protection. Tilden stood before cameras and declared with absolute certainty that the February 11th agreement was not a parenting plan. It was a containment strategy. She argued that the Duke of Sussex, operating under the guidance of institutional royal interests, had used family dynamics as a weapon to force a legally suspect and emotionally punitive arrangement onto a woman who had already sacrificed more than the public would ever fully understand. Now stop for a moment and consider what was actually being said. A signed agreement, the product of weeks of mediation, was being characterized as institutional coercion within hours of its completion, not revised, not questioned, burned. The filing went further than anyone expected. For the first time in a formal legal setting, allegations surfaced that had previously only existed in whispered corners. A full forensic reassessment of Harry's mental health stability was requested, with 3 specific incidents cited from 2017 through 2019. Disappearances during high-profile family events, a documented instance of verbal aggression while intoxicated in early 2018, the very years during which the couple had publicly presented themselves as a united front, healing together, protecting each other from the cold machinery of the monarchy. The healing, it turned out, had always been selective. Meghan's legal team argued through 5 evaluative pillars: income, housing, parenting history, spousal conduct, and mental health, that California family law should view this situation with one clear lens. A prince, stripped of his institutional armor, is simply another father, and a duchess, stripped of her titles by an international institution, is simply a mother who had been blacklisted. The document argued that the 60-40 financial split on education was arbitrary and punitive, particularly given that Meghan's net income had allegedly collapsed following a palace decision to revoke certain brand privileges in early February. On top of all of this, her team submitted a formal request for monthly spousal support of $187,000, citing career disruption and reputational damage directly linked to royal entanglement. And here's where the story takes its first deeply uncomfortable turn. If the incidents of erratic behavior and substance use cited in that filing were real, and if they occurred as early as 2017, the very year of their engagement, then why were they being introduced now, in 2026, 9 years later, in a courtroom? Not to a therapist, not to a mediator, to a judge. Harry's legal team, led by Miles Armitage, had anticipated every word. They filed a 17-page preemptive defense that did not simply deny the allegations, it dismantled them with evidence. School withdrawal letters signed by Meghan in December 2025, without Harry's knowledge or consent, as travel planning documents for Doha and Dubai already scheduled for early 2026. And perhaps most damaging of all, internal brand strategy notes referencing Archie and Lilibet, not as children but as assets in a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign being developed for the Middle East. The woman presenting herself as a mother fighting against a global empire was, according to the evidence, simultaneously preparing to launch a new corporate era, with her children at the center of it. The stage was set for a preliminary hearing on February 16th at the Santa Barbara Family Law Courthouse. But before that hearing could happen, a new shadow emerged, one that involved a 33-acre estate in Gloucestershire, a frozen portfolio of $7.8 million, and a document buried deep inside an encrypted server that would ultimately change everything. If the custody battle was the heart of this crisis, the financial disclosures were its cold and calculating nervous system. When the financial filings landed in the California Superior Court, they didn't arrive as a simple list of assets. And they arrived as an 87-page forensic autopsy of what had once been positioned as one of the most glamorous philanthropic empires in the world. To the public, the Sussex brand represented progress, compassion, and the courage to walk away from privilege in pursuit of purpose. To the court-appointed accountants reviewing the actual numbers, it represented something considerably less noble. The most explosive single figure was $2.3 million in personal purchases made on joint credit lines between 2022 and 2025. Over $480,000 spent on fashion acquisitions from houses like Hermès, Dior, and Elie Saab. Another $670,000 dedicated to private aviation bookings for solo trips to Abu Dhabi and Nice. And $310,000 poured into image enhancement and media training. An attempt, the filing argued, to purchase back the public affection that had been steadily draining away. But these weren't just personal expenses buried in a credit card statement. American Express and HSBC records, cross-referenced with Archewell's own corporate spending logs, suggested that personal luxuries had been systematically funneled through foundation sub-accounts. A former Archewell accountant, appearing in a leaked deposition, put a human face on the digital trail. Invoices, they claimed, were being retroactively relabeled as brand representation or philanthropy alignment, obscuring the reality that donor money had effectively been underwriting luxury handbags and international press escorts. People who gave because they believed in a mission had been funding a lifestyle. It was a betrayal of the most intimate kind, because it was dressed up as generosity. Then the investigation crossed oceans. A redacted document from the United States Treasury Financial Crimes Enforcement Network confirmed the existence of 2 Cayman Islands accounts associated with a shell company called Echo Clover Limited, registered in the British Virgin Islands and reportedly controlled by an Archewell-aligned trustee. Between August and December of 2025, these accounts had allegedly received $890,000 in transfers from Dubai-based event organizers. None of it appeared in the foundation's tax filings. None of it appeared in any individual financial declarations. When the palace became aware of these details, they did not issue a strongly worded statement. They triggered the 2023 Crown Transparency Statute and forwarded the documents directly to the United Kingdom's Serious Fraud Office. Meghan's spokesperson called the findings defamatory. Her team argued that every dollar spent was an investment in identity expansion and post-exit career continuity. They framed the spending not as excess but as self-defense, the financial cost of surviving a hostile institution. But inside Archewell, the story being told was very different. As the financial details leaked, the foundation fractured from within. 3 senior figures, and including the director of brand partnerships and the deputy legal counsel, resigned within 24 hours of the filing. Staff who had believed in the mission found themselves staring at subpoenas and trying to calculate how far their loyalty was actually worth. Early joint estimates from the UK Charities Commission and the US Office of Tax-Exempt Organization Review placed potential misappropriation somewhere between $2.7 million and $4.4 million. Rumors moved quickly through Hollywood that major partners were quietly reevaluating their 2026 commitments. The fear wasn't simply controversy, it was the specific career-ending blowback of being publicly associated with a brand under active IRS audit. Meghan's team countered by pointing to Harry's side of the financial ledger. They alleged he had been sheltering Windsor-aligned properties, including the Hartwell estate in Gloucestershire, and a combined savings portfolio of $7.8 million that had been frozen by court order. They renewed their demand for $187,000 per month in spousal support and argued that the financial imbalance was itself a form of institutional punishment. The war had moved from the heart to the wallet, and deep inside Archewell's encrypted servers, and a forensic IT team was about to find something that would make every financial dispute look trivial by comparison: a document, a plan, a blueprint for the most audacious move in this entire saga. They were about to find Project Mirror. While the courtrooms in California had become theaters of noise, the halls of Windsor remained something far more unsettling, a sanctuary of terrifying clinical silence. This was not the silence of a family choosing to look away. This was the silence of a centuries-old institution that had survived revolutions, world wars, abdications, and assassinations, now recalibrating with the slow and merciless precision of something that had simply never lost before. By mid-February of 2026, the British royal household had stopped reacting to the Sussex narrative and begun the deliberate process of overwriting it. The first move was the formal activation of the Custodial Advisory Committee, operating under the direct strategic guidance of Princess Anne. The palace issued a legal brief simultaneously delivered to the UK Family Division Court and the British Consulate in Los Angeles. Not a press release, not a spokesperson comment, but a sovereign directive. It confirmed that Duchess Sophie of Edinburgh had been formally appointed as a co-guardian in custodial transition. The message, for those fluent in royal institutional language, could not have been clearer. Whatever the California courts decided, the monarchy was already prepared with a logistical, legal, and emotional infrastructure that no celebrity lawyer could dismantle. Then came the move that required no lawyers at all. Late on the evening of February 12th, Princess Catherine released a video from Grey House, the residents quietly being prepared for the children's potential relocation. No filters, no dramatic score, no accusations. Standing before a wall of children's artwork in soft, natural light, the Princess of Wales spoke for exactly 90 seconds. She said only that whatever role she was called to play, she would carry it with grace and clarity, and that the situation was about innocence, not inheritance. Within 8 hours, that video had been watched 11.4 million times. While Meghan's legal team was filing hundreds of pages of grievances, Catherine had offered a single image of stillness, and the world, exhausted by months of legal warfare, chose stillness. Public sentiment in Australia, Canada, and New Zealand swung decisively back toward the monarchy, not because of a legal argument, because of a 90-second reminder that some things matter more than winning. But the most consequential move was happening away from every camera. Lady Louise Windsor arrived at Dulles International Airport not as a private citizen making a personal trip, but under a diplomatic seal from RAF Northolt, accompanied by 2 child welfare officers and a trauma psychologist. Her mission was the direct application of the Windsor, California Reciprocal Accord of 2024, a treaty that Meghan's own legal advisors had once celebrated as a mere formality, useful primarily for preserving her titles. It turned out to be something else entirely. The accord granted temporary dual sovereign status to minor royal heirs in cases of proven reputational or custodial risk. Lady Louise was authorized to conduct an on-site welfare review of Archie and Lilibet. Because she carried diplomatic cover, her presence was not a request. It was not negotiable. Meghan's team in Brentwood attempted to block access, citing a California injunction against foreign custodial interference. The international legal architecture of the children's titles, the very titles Meghan had fought to preserve, made the palace's move bulletproof. The treaty Meghan had kept had become the mechanism of her containment. Simultaneously, Prince William convened a private session with the Royal Household Financial Office, and every Windsor-linked asset co-managed with Harry, trademarks, royalties, institutional accounts, was placed under independent escrow review. This was not merely a financial maneuver. It was a severing of the oxygen supply to the entire Archewell operation. Without access to those assets, the brand could not sustain itself. The machine was being switched off one circuit at a time. By the morning of February 14th, Harry's legal team filed a motion requesting independent psychological evaluations for both parents. The strategy of the Windsor institution was now fully visible. They were not fighting Meghan Markle in the tabloids or in television studios. They were encircling her with international treaties, financial freezes, and a narrative that placed children, not brands, not legacies, not narrative equity, at the absolute center of every decision. The sun set on February 15th, with the world no longer asking whether Meghan would win. They were asking how much longer she could hold out against something that had outlasted empires. And then, buried inside Archewell's encrypted servers, the forensic IT team found it, Project Mirror. The air inside the Santa Barbara family law courthouse on the morning of February 16th had the specific weight of a moment that knows it is about to become history. Up until this point, the public had understood the Sussex conflict as a war of ideologies, modern celebrity independence versus ancient sovereign tradition, a compelling story, regardless of which side you occupied. But when the court-appointed forensic IT team took the stand, that framing dissolved completely. What emerged in its place was something far more calculated and far more chilling. Project Mirror was a 42-page tactical document dated January 18th, 2026. It was not a pitch deck. It was not a brainstorming exercise. The metadata was precise, tracking multiple rounds of edits made under Meghan's personal administrative login over a 5-month development period. The document outlined a comprehensive plan for the permanent relocation of Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet to the state of Qatar, not as a temporary arrangement, not as a residence adjustment, but as a full-scale permanent extraction from the legal jurisdictions of both the United Kingdom and the United States. The mechanism was a multi-year media development contract with an entertainment subsidiary of the Qatari Sovereign Fund. But the contract was not for documentaries about humanitarian issues or global mental health. It was for exclusive media access to the daily lives of the royal children, their routines, their milestones, their identities, packaged and licensed under the sovereignty of a foreign state. The plan proposed establishing dual citizenship through honorary sponsorship. Once completed, this would place the children under a different legal system entirely, one where Harry's parental rights under Western law would be, in practical terms, nearly impossible to enforce. An international school in Lusail had already been identified. Enrollment documents had been drafted, though not yet signed. When this was read into the court record, the room went silent. Harry reportedly went pale. For years, he had defended his wife against every allegation of strategic calculation. He had called the accusations unfair. He had called them racist. He had called them institutional persecution dressed up as journalism. And now he was sitting in a courtroom staring at a document that suggested the mother of his children had been, for 5 months, planning to take them to a country where he could not follow with any legal authority. The intent was now on the record, not alleged, documented. Cher Tilden attempted an immediate recovery. She argued that Project Mirror was a creative hypothetical, a brand exercise designed to explore future possibilities for a woman of color seeking refuge from institutional racism. It was never, she insisted, an executable plan. The forensic evidence did not support that interpretation. Private aviation logs confirmed 3 round-trip flights between Venice and Doha in late 2025, all booked under a shell company. The encrypted message sent to a Qatari legal consultant, asking explicitly for a sovereign guarantee of custodial non-extradition, was recovered and entered into evidence. When Justice Maya Caldwell asked Meghan directly to explain the necessity of such a guarantee, the courtroom waited in silence for 30 full seconds. Meghan did not speak. As news of Project Mirror reached the press, the ideological fault lines in America shifted violently. A Washington Post editorial titled "Custody Meets Capitalism" asked aloud, why a self-proclaimed human rights advocate would seek legal sanctuary in a state with vastly different views on sovereign guardianship, public support for Meghan, which had held at around 52% in certain U.S. demographics, collapsed to 28% within 48 hours. The American public can absorb a complicated divorce. They can absorb financial mismanagement. What they cannot absorb, what triggers something deeply, almost primitively protective, is the image of a parent preparing to move children across the world to make a father legally irrelevant. Inside Archewell, the implosion was immediate. Former staffers, fearful of being personally implicated in a conspiracy to violate international custody law, began cooperating with the court. 3 submitted sworn affidavits alleging that joint foundation funds had been used to finance the Project Mirror research, the expenses hidden under the label of global outreach development. One wrote simply, "We were told it was about her legacy and she didn't need Harry's approval. We were just following a vision. Now it looks like a crime." Justice Caldwell issued an emergency order. The children's passports were to be surrendered to a court-appointed third party immediately. All digital contact between the children and their mother was to be monitored by a child welfare liaison. The walls had not just closed in, they had locked. The final act arrived on February 18, 2026, at 10:03 in the morning. The atmosphere outside the Santa Barbara Family Law Courthouse was electric with the particular tension of a verdict that everyone already suspects but no one dares to state out loud. Meghan arrived flanked by 4 attorneys and a digital strategist. No royal jewelry, no designer labels easily identifiable to a telephoto lens, black slacks, a fitted blazer, a studied performance of defiant simplicity from a woman who had built an entire identity on the precise management of visual language. Inside courtroom 4B, Justice Maya Caldwell did not waste time on ceremony. The forensic cross-examination of Project Mirror's metadata was systematic and total. Meghan's team maintained the hypothetical brand exercise defense until the court-appointed experts presented something that shattered it entirely: evidence that Meghan had personally accessed the Lusail school enrollment documents 14 times in a single week. The encrypted message to the Qatari legal consultant requesting a sovereign guarantee of custodial non-extradition was entered into evidence. When the judge asked Meghan to explain why such a guarantee would be necessary for a purely hypothetical document, the courtroom held its breath. 30 seconds of silence. She did not answer. The hearing then moved through the financial wreckage of Archewell, the $1.1 million in itemized transfers to the UAE, the $480,000 in luxury fashion acquisitions, the shell companies and offshore accounts that had turned a philanthropic foundation into a subject of IRS audit and international fraud inquiry. And then Justice Caldwell delivered the sentence that stopped everything. Looking directly at Meghan, she said, "You cannot weaponize motherhood and reject responsibility in the same breath." The ruling was total. The February 11th agreement was confirmed as the permanent framework for the children's lives. All relocation attempts were strictly prohibited without mutual written consent, backed by a $5 million bond. And Meghan was ordered to reimburse the frozen joint estate $1.3 million for misallocated Archewell funds within 90 days. The Archewell Foundation was ordered dissolved, its remaining assets frozen pending distribution under charitable trust law. Control of the children's social media account with its 3.2 million followers was transferred to the Royal Child Welfare Trust. And in a ruling that effectively erased a decade of brand building, Meghan was barred from launching any entity, trademark, or media product containing the terms Arch, Windsor, Sussex, or Lilibet for a period of 10 years. The judge ruled that these were institutional assets. They could not be privately monetized. Observers described Meghan as stone-faced throughout the reading. She did not cry. She did not speak. She sat entirely still while her attorneys whispered with increasing urgency around her. Harry, seated just feet away, kept his head lowered and his eyes closed. Yet there was no visible relief on his face, only the unmistakable exhaustion of a man who had been fighting for years and had finally arrived at the end of something enormous, without any certainty about what came next. At 1:23 in the afternoon, Meghan exited the courthouse alone. No black SUVs with tinted windows, no Archewell staff, no prepared statement. She walked to a mid-range vehicle driven by a private assistant and left quietly. For the first time since 2018, she was truly, legally, publicly alone. That evening, the Royal Gazette was updated. Meghan's name was formally removed from all royal trustee positions. The Grey House Protection Act was ratified, ensuring that Archie and Lilibet would remain under the joint guardianship of Princess Catherine and Duchess Sophie whenever they were on British soil. And just after sunset, Harry issued a handwritten statement on the royal family website. It was not signed as a duke, it was not signed as a prince, it was signed Henry Charles Albert David. He wrote, "I will never be perfect, but I will be present. I will be a father before I am anything else." In the weeks that followed February 18th, a strange and unfamiliar stillness settled across both sides of the Atlantic. The news drones that had orbited the Montecito mansion for years drifted away in search of a louder story. The social media accounts that had tracked every filing, every sighting, every coordinated outfit went quiet. And in that quiet, the full shape of what had just happened became visible. Meghan found herself inhabiting a landscape she no longer recognized. The 10-year ban on her primary trademarks, the very words that had formed the architecture of her post-royal identity, functioned as a kind of invisible cage. She was a woman of enormous public recognition, with no platform she could legally call her own. The $1.3 million owed back to the joint estate was the Financial Opening Act. The true cost was the complete evaporation of the Sussex aura, the sense of moral authority, narrative control, and institutional mystique that had made the Sussex brand feel, for a time, like something genuinely powerful. Without royal connection, and without Archewell, the brand had no engine. She was left as a private citizen bound by court-mandated oversight, navigating a world that had watched her legal strategy collapse in real time on an international stage. Harry's path forward was quieter and in some ways more painful. By signing his final statement as Henry Charles Albert David, he wasn't just ending a marriage. He was attempting something far more difficult, the reclamation of a self that had become almost entirely obscured by years of narrative performance. He did not return to the institution as a hero. He returned as a father seeking the one thing that celebrity had never actually provided him: stability. The Sandringham Declaration on Sovereign Minor Protections ensured his children would grow up with a foundation built on the structural permanence of the crown, something no brand deal, no streaming contract, and no podcast could replicate. He had traded the volatile spotlight for the cold, enduring safety of the institution he had once tried to flee. The children, Archie and Lilibet, became the quiet center around which everything else was organized. Under the Grey House Protection Act, their lives would no longer be curated for social media engagement or documentary storyboards. They would grow up protected by Duchess Sophie and guided by Lady Louise, shielded from the kind of transactional childhood that Project Mirror had nearly made a reality. As we close this investigation into the most aggressive legal confrontation in modern royal history, the final question is one that history alone will answer fully. Was this the story of a family falling apart? Or was it the story of an institution deciding, with absolute cold clarity, that it would protect its future at any cost, using not anger, not arrogance, but the one resource that celebrity and capital have never been able to purchase? Time. The Windsor machine waited. It documented everything. It used the law, the history, and a clinical, enduring silence that proved more powerful than any headline, any interview, or any 42-page relocation plan. In the history books of the future, the Sussex era will likely occupy a small and turbulent chapter in a 1,000-year story, remembered as the moment when personal branding attempted to replace sovereign bloodline, and when the world was reminded that a crown is not simply an ornament. It is a fortress. The mirror has broken, the gates are closed, and for the first time in nearly a decade, the House of Windsor is, quietly and completely at peace.